The WonderSwan entered the portable market in a handheld head-to-head, albeit an inevitably lopsided head-to-head. But first, as usual, a brief prelude of context. Handheld video games had been around since the late 70s, when Mattel started using LED devices the size of a calculator, with half a kilobyte of memory to bring the arcade action, which was just starting to break open, into the confined comfort of kids' backpacks. Auto race and football, as primitive as they were in recreating those recreational realities, gave you the power to put the pedal to the metal and make equally exciting drives down the sidelines of a football field. Of course, these were just dots on a display, but hey, with a little imagination, these were pretty nifty innovations. After all, Home Pong had just released, and so the idea of not only being able to play games in your living room, but on the bus or on your way to work, now that was a novelty. Coleco and Milton Bradley eventually entered the market with their own handhelds, the latter boasting the Microvision, the first portable system to feature interchangeable cartridges. About a year later, Gunpei Yokoi would come up with the idea for the Game & Watch, a successful handheld in Japan that would notably replace one aesthetic tradition of control with another, the joystick for the D-pad. But Yokoi wasn't through innovating. The Game Boy, from the name to its design, won consumers over with its simplicity. No color, just a small screen, a basic gray square box. But oh, were the games fun, and oh did they last long, thanks to the machine's awesome battery economy. By the late 90s, a decade after the GB's release, Nintendo was in a radically different position than they had been in their heyday only 10 years earlier. Another of Yokoi's inventions, the Virtual Boy, was a bust. The N64 became the first of Nintendo's home consoles to be clearly dominated by a competitor, i.e. the PlayStation. And in general, a lack of product development for the company left the door open for competitors to battle for their share of handheld turf. While virtually all of them failed, Bandai's WonderSwan was one of the few, among others like the Game Gear and Neo Geo Pocket Color, to enjoy a measure of success for a few reasons. The main thing was that this bird was another of Yokoi's flock. After being delegated to trifling window tasks by Nintendo, the man's punishment for his virtual bomb, Gunpei aimed for a comeback by one-upping his Game & Watch and Game Boy with a new toy for Bandai, so it had the genius and experience of Yokoi behind it. Unfortunately, of course, the tragedy of his death would rob him of any chance to see the fate of his final creation. But the WonderSwan also had a decent library with a fair amount of first-party games to boot, many of them based on anime series like Digimon and Dragon Ball. Keep in mind that the WonderSwan was essentially a Japanese exclusive. It failed to pick up steam anywhere else. But the main reason why the WonderSwan was a hit was because Bandai made a deal with Square to port the earliest iterations of Final Fantasy onto the device. Remember, this was after the SNES days and Square and Nintendo had fallen out. That was soon about to change, of course, as the two would eventually kiss and make up, a factor that would reverse the WonderSwan's popularity and leave it discontinued as early as 2003. The arrival of the Game Boy Advance also had something to do with this implosion. So while the WonderSwan may remain an obscure artifact, especially to North American audiences, it symbolizes, like its dozens of peers before and after, the failure to match the everlasting appeal of the Game Boy. It had Final Fantasy as its primary bullet point, but that is where the wonder ended. Nonetheless, we remember the day the WonderSwan tried to take on Yokoi's other boy, March 4th, 1999.